And welcome back. If you're looking for the ultimate travel photography companion for your everyday stuff, whether you're traveling or whether you bring your camera along with you on your stroll every day, this video may be for you, because the Fujifilm X-T50 that you see in my hands over here is, in my opinion, the tiniest, smallest, lightweight camera with the most potential that you have in the market right now. And while this may seem a little bit too enthusiastic, if you stick around, you're going to understand why I'm enthusiastic about this camera. Now, before you say anything, yes, Fujifilm sent me the camera for review and test out after they invited me at their launch event. Yes, I could try them, but no, I didn't get to keep it, and I already returned the camera. The one that I have in my hands is the camera that I purchased for myself. And that's why you're going to see a silver camera, which is the loaner that Fujifilm sent me in the B-roll and stuff like that. And in my hands, you see the charcoal gray camera, because this is the one that I purchased for myself. So yes, I'm enthusiastic about the camera to the point where I purchased a copy for myself, and at the same time I'm selling my XH2, not the XH2S, but we're going to talk about it later, because I have this camera, because I really think this camera is unique in the market. Now, without any further ado, let's go dive into the review. I'm also going to compare this camera against the X-T5 and X-T30, the predecessor and the bigger brother, because there are a lot of similarities and differences between these cameras. And also, as usual, this video has chapter markers, so if you want to jump to a specific section, feel free to get there. But I would recommend you to stay with me. I hope this video is not going to be super long. Now, from a construction standpoint, the camera is super small. You can see it in my hands. I have rather big hands, and this camera feels really tiny and compact, and it's very lightweight. However, despite being super lightweight and super compact, it also feels great in the end. I believe it has a lot to do with these rounded edges that you see over here. Oops, where is it focusing? Okay. You see over here, those make gripping the camera super easy and a lot more comfortable than the X-T5. We're going to talk about that in a second, but it feels like it handles super nice. Now, the grip, which is a little bit more pronounced than the predecessor, it makes it easy to hold, and also makes it easy to handle the camera, because also here in the back, the Q button was moved more on an external position where you don't accidentally press it, and at the same time serves as a thumb grip, which helps handling the camera. Now, this camera, from a construction standpoint, is really good, but it's not weather sealed. And considering the price, which we're going to talk about in the conclusions, this may be considered a deal breaker for some, because a camera in this price range, which is $1,300, 1,500 euros in Italy, for many people should be weather sealed, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be. But also, if you follow this channel, if you follow this channel for a while, I've been saying that weather sealing is a little bit overrated as far as features as far as construction goes. I've been shooting X-T 2-digit cameras in very bad conditions, and it also happened. I shot Iceland with the X-T20 6 years ago, and now I got back to Iceland, not for photography purposes, but I found a way to shoot photography for one day with this camera, and in both conditions, in both situations, the camera got wet. I was shooting under waterfalls and all of that. Of course, not right under the water, but around waterfalls, there's a lot of water around, and I didn't have any issue neither with the X-T20 or this camera. So while for the price, it would have made sense for this camera to be weather sealed, the lack of weather sealing is not the end of the world. Of course, if you're shooting constantly in wet conditions or super humid conditions, that is a different story. But I don't think this would be the camera for you. It's for a professional shooting in the Amazon forest. You're not going to use this camera, I believe. Now, price aside, this camera has a lot going for it, and has a couple of things that I didn't like. Let's start with the things that I didn't like. The camera is Again, it's not weather sealed, but it's not a big deal for me. It doesn't have dual car slot, but again, not a big deal for a camera as compact as this one is not a big issue. But the thing that I didn't like the most is the use of the old battery. The use of the old battery, although it doesn't impact the duration of the battery too much because they really optimize the way the camera works, so you can squeeze a lot of shots with the new battery. I thought that it would make more sense for it to be the new battery because this would be an ideal second body to an X-T50. And I'll still stand by that, but I also realized this is probably not the camera that was built to be a second body to the X-T50. This is more a camera that you have for yourself, and this is just your main camera, your only camera as an enthusiast, not necessarily as a professional. Although you can do a lot of professional stuff with this thing, and we're going to discuss about it later. And in general, I started to understand better why they did it. Yet, despite the camera being a little bit thicker than the X-T30, they kept the same battery. The one good thing, speaking about the battery, is that finally they moved the tripod collar in a position where even if you have a small plate, you can still open the door, okay? So finally, for the first time on an X-T 2-digit camera, we can finally remove the SD card or the battery without removing the tripod plate, which for me is a huge thing, is one of the, for as stupid as it seems, one of the things that made me move on from the X-T20 because it was too cumbersome and it didn't make too much sense to do it for me. In this case, they solved it. Now, let's go into the detail of the construction. On the top plate, you have your flash. The built-in flash is one of the few cameras that are remaining with a built-in flash. And believe me, the built-in flash is often overlooked, but it's one of the nicest things when you're not going to do any professional stuff with the built-in flash, okay? But if you're around your family, with your friends, and you're in a dark situation, that built-in flash is with you all the time. You don't have to bring an additional flash. And for as small as it is, for as close as the sensor it is, so it may end up having red eye effect, and also it's not super powerful. And if you have a big lens, it's going to cast a shadow on the image. But that being said, it's there. It's there for you to use. Then it's on you to maximize its capabilities by knowing what you're shooting, what you're not shooting, and how you're shooting it. But it's there. And it's really nice to have, especially when you're hanging out with other people and sometimes you just need a flash because it's too dark around you. On the top plate, you also have your auto dial over here. Let me show you. Not that I ever used it, but for beginners or if you're handing the camera to someone else, you just put it in auto and it goes. So it's pretty handy in some occasions. Again, not for me. And also you have your usual shutter speed dial, your usual exposure compensation dial. You have a very small button here on top, which is very flush. It's honestly hard to press. You gotta remember that it's there. Not a big deal, but if it was a little bit of a hump, it would have helped a lot. Recognizing that you have that because it's easy. It's handy because it's in a good position. But anyways, not a big deal. And on the top of the camera, you also have the famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, film simulation dial. Now, the film simulation dial is being super divisive when this camera was launched. And I myself said that the way it is, it's not super useful if you're an experienced photographer because you may want to associate a curve to your film simulation just to make the image exactly the way you want. Right now, this is not possible. And that will make a lot of a difference. But aside from that, it's a nice thing for those who have been shooting Fujifilm and have never tried the film simulation. In my opinion, film simulations are one of those things that define Fuji because it's one of the perks of using Fujifilm. So the fact that Fujifilm went all in on that, it kind of makes sense. So It doesn't bother me. You have a couple of customizable positions, 1, 2, and 3, and also the C position that allows you to go to your usual way of doing stuff. So you press the Q button and you have your 7 custom settings that you can assign. And again, if I have the possibility to ask for one change, is just let us customize the curve associated to the film simulation, and I'll be happy. The way it is, it's handy, but also a little bit limiting. That is my take on that. On the side, you have your connections. There's finally a 3.5 millimeter jack, USB-C, and a micro HDMI, and that's it. But it's a super small camera. It was unlikely to find anything more than that. But the USB-C also serves as a way to monitor your audio. We're going to talk about video later, through a dongle which comes in the box, and you can charge the camera via USB-C. The micro HDMI is probably the only way they could squeeze an HDMI in such a small body, but the good thing is that finally we got rid of the 2.5 millimeter jack, which was pretty annoying on the smaller version of these cameras before this one. On the back, you have your usual stuff. There's the drive button here, which was not a thing before, because you had, in the X-T50, you had the film simulation dial was actually your drive dial. So you have this, you have the play button over here, you have a rear screen that tilts up and down, and it's good, and it's very crisp. It's a very good screen. You also have a decent viewfinder. It's not bad when it comes to size, because it's small, but it's very, very usable. It's only that from a technical specification standpoint, it's kind of low res compared to today's standards. The reality is, however, I cannot complain. Like, I was using it every day and it didn't bother me at all. Other viewfinder with the same resolution were bothering me a lot more. If you watched my AEC 6700 review, you know about that. This one is usable. However, again, considering the price, it could have been a little bit improved over the previous versions. That being said, you also have buttons. Now you have the autofocus joystick. In my opinion, the autofocus joystick is a little bit in the low as a position. I would have preferred for this to be switched with the A and L button, but other than that, not a big deal. And then you have your usual front and rear dial. Let me show you here that you can push to change function, and even the back you can push and you can change function. It's the X-T 2-digit camera that you would expect, with a twist. And also, let's just not forget, this is the first X-T 2-digit camera that is stabilized. So in my opinion, construction is super good for this type of camera. There's nothing really to complain about except for the lack of weather sealing and the battery. But again, those are not deal breaker, at least in my opinion. Last but not least, you can choose it in 3 different colors: black, silver, and charcoal gray. I keep saying it. The charcoal gray is a spectacular color. It's really a spectacular color. It's by far my favorite color of them all. Now, the X-T50, it's not, in my opinion, an entry-level camera. And it's not an entry-level camera for a very reason, but the majority of it comes from its sensor and the image quality that you get out of it. I would call this a mid-level camera, to the point where this camera basically uses what is, in my opinion, the best APS-C sensor currently available in the market, especially from a photographic standpoint. We're going to talk about video in a second, because you can get a lot of resolution, you get beautiful colors, you can work with shadows in a super easy way, you get a little bit more limited with highlights. This has always been Fujifilm's Achilles heels, but still you can recover almost 2 stops of highlights, and you get a decent, despite being 40 megapixels, so being very, very high megapixel count for an APS-C sensor, you can get pretty good high ISO performance out of the sensor, to the point where if you expose it correctly, you can definitely use 6400 ISO. Of course, there's going to be noise, but the noise that comes with the Fujifilm cameras is not that distracting. It's actually good looking noise that doesn't necessarily compromise the image quality. I also shot, like this shot you can see is shot at 6400 ISO, and I raised like 1.5 stops out of it because it was super dark, but I had to freeze the moment. The image quality is still decent. Of course, it's not the best image quality of the world. And by increasing the exposure by 1.5 stop on a 6400 ISO image on an APS-C high megapixel camera, you definitely lose some of the image quality, but it's not that dramatic. Of course, going higher with the extended range as 2800 and more, that's where you get a hit. But up to 6400 ISO, you can shoot with no worries as long as you can expose it correctly. I won't dive too much on the image quality in this because I pushed a video that you will find over here where I compared the image quality of the X-H2, which has the same sensor of this camera, with all the other sensors. So I was a lot more in depth in the way I was analyzing the image quality. For the purpose of this review, it should be sufficient to say that you get probably the best image quality you can get out of an APS-C camera today in 2024. Also, what you get is the stabilization, which allows you to shoot pretty easily with longer shutter speed. I was able to shoot 1/3 of a second, 1/6 of a second at 50 millimeters on the new kit lens, which is not stabilized. That means you get a pretty good performance out of the stabilization in the camera. Of course, you can always ask for more, but usually X-T2 digit camera didn't have any of that. So you're going from nothing to a stabilization that gets you a lot of flexibility. And again, it's nice to have it because it makes your life easier in a super small and compact package. So bottom line, you get flagship image quality because the X-H2 is kind of a flagship camera from this standpoint. In a super small and compact body that allows you to shoot any type of photography that you want. I've shot this for landscape, concerts, with friends in a family environment, with portraits, I think I said wildlife. No, I didn't say wildlife. No, wildlife. If you pair this lens with the 150-600, it's kind of ridiculous because it looks like a real lens cap. But you can do it and you can get great result, and the image quality is top notch. So don't dismiss this camera just because it's small. It can get you great image quality in every possible scenario if you know how to use it. From an autofocus standpoint, you get the latest and greatest from Fujifilm, which doesn't mean it's the best in class, because it's not. Let's be real. It's not the best in class, but it's still reliable and usable in every possible scenario. So you're getting a camera that can focus really fast and very precisely, not as fast and precise, especially not as precisely as the competition, but you get a camera that will be granting you good result throughout your shooting experience. Even in wildlife scenario, you can definitely achieve very good result, although this is, as I mentioned before, this is not the camera that was built for wildlife. But you get, again, good autofocus. I was in Iceland, I was shooting puffin for the first time in my life, and I wasn't even sporting the 150-600 because I went there for other purposes, not for photography. So I went with the smaller lenses that I have, which was the 70-300. I was still able to shoot puffins with that lens, and it was tracking with no issues at all. Of course, with the 150-600, it would have been better because the bird was going to be bigger in the frame. But that being said, you can do a lot of stuff with this camera. You also get features that cameras that cost 2-3 times as much don't have, or have in a limited way. I'm talking about the pre-capture, pre-shot with electronic shutter. You can get up to 13 frames per second with the electronic shutter. It's 8 with the mechanical shutter. And if you activate the electronic shutter, you can activate the pre-shot capture, which means that the camera starts shooting pictures even before you press the shutter button. That means that if you're tracking a subject, the moment you react to what's happening, you're probably already late the moment you press the shutter button. As long as you're focusing, the camera keeps recording stuff and it saves the last portion of what happened before you actually press the shutter. That is a neat thing, and it does it with RAW. Again, stuff that, let's just say the new Z63 from Nikon, cannot do. They can do it, but they can do it in JPEG. This camera, at half the price, super small, super compact, can do pre-capture in RAW, which is important because doing it only in JPEG almost defeat the purpose, because you're using the pre-capture to capture that exact moment, and you want to be able to capture that moment and edit that moment in the best possible way. So again, you're getting very, very high-end features on a camera that is super small and super compact, which partially justifies why the price went up. But we're going to discuss that in the conclusions. You get, as I mentioned, you get 8 FPS in mechanical shutter, but you also can get to up to 20 FPS in electronic shutter, but you need to accept a crop. But again, you have a 40 megapixel camera, even if it's cropping, it's not a dramatic issue, so you can get up to that with autofocus. Of course, the viewfinder is not going to be blackout free. You need an X-H2S with its stacked sensor to get that, but it's still easy to track. The blackout is not that dramatic. You can also shoot a 1/180,000th of a second. Not that I really need it, but it's there if you want to use it. And in general, you get great result. You're basically getting a mini X-T5 with only minor drawbacks, which is a shorter buffer, meaning that the buffer fills up a little bit faster than you can in the X-T5, and a shorter battery life, because once you start doing this advanced stuff, pre-capture with electronic shutter and autofocus continuous in boost mode with all of the bells and whistles, that's where you start eating your battery pretty dramatically. And that's where the smaller battery kind of shows its age. And also with video, it eats the battery pretty quickly. Again, much better than the previous versions, X-T30, X-T20 and all of that. But still, the battery is small and you only can squeeze so much out of that. But that being said, aside from the buffer and the battery, you basically get what you can get with an X-T5 in a much smaller, much more lightweight, and easier to handle package. Because again, I remind you that what surprised me is it's easier to handle the X-T50 than it is to handle the X-T5, because the X-T5 is more edgy, and in my palm, it was kind of pushing against my palm. Now, let's quickly address the big elephant in the room, which is the recent reports on autofocusing issue with Fujifilm. I hope I'll be doing another specific video on that. By the way, the X-H2S is recording me with firmware 7.0. You tell me whether it's doing right or not. I just updated, so I don't know if it's working or not. But yes, there have been reports where, and I also experienced some inconsistency of the autofocus, while with previous versions up to the, I don't remember the 3, I wasn't having any of that. So there is some issues in general with the autofocusing system on the Fujifilm cameras. Talking about the X-T50, however, I didn't have any specific issue. The only one thing that I can mention was that the pre-production sample that I got from Fujifilm in a couple of occasions would refuse to focus on a low contrast subject, but that didn't happen with the production copy. So I'm going to dismiss that as a pre-production sample issue, because my production sample doesn't have that. And in general, with the X-T50, I found that the autofocus were working really good compared to Fujifilm standards. I was also shooting in a very dark portraits in a very dark situation where I would use basically only the flash, the speedlight light to illuminate my subject, and I only had a couple of missed shots over hundreds of them. So not a big deal. Don't worry. There's a lot of confusion going around. For everyday use, it is still a reliable system. So I just wanted to clarify that. While this camera is mainly aimed at photographers and it's a photography camera, it still sports very interesting specs. And funny enough, the first thing I did with this camera, since I had an assignment, was shooting videos for a mountain bike race. And I put this camera through a pretty demanding test because although I was shooting in 1080 50p 420 H.264 8-bit, so not super demanding from a codec standpoint, I put this camera on a tripod under direct sun at 30 Celsius degrees, and it kept shooting up. I had to then move it after 20 minutes. It was showing me the yellow warning frame, but the camera was set to normal, not to extended. So it was on the setting that is most conservative for the camera. It would show me the yellow warning, but it didn't shut down and it kept recording. It was warm to the touch, but also, again, I was under the sun with no shade on the camera and it kept going. So yes, it may overheat. Yes, the fact that it's a small camera, of course, doesn't help with that, but also in a pretty demanding situation, the camera did really, really good. That being said, when you raise your needs and you start shooting 4K, you have various options. You can also shoot 6.2K, which I normally don't use, so I'm not going to talk about that so much. But what is important to me is 4K, and you have two options: 4K normal and 4K HQ, meaning high quality. With 4K high quality, you have an oversampled version of the 4K, which gets you a better image quality at the expense of the readout speed and at the expense of a crop on the camera. It's 1.23 times. The normal for 4K, it's still really good, so you shouldn't be worried about that. And reduces the crop. Actually, it has no crop, if I'm not wrong. And it's much faster when it comes to readout speed. When you compare the two, you can definitely see that the rolling shutter on the 4K HQ is a lot more than you can see on the 4K normal. The image quality is beautiful in both cases, so I would only recommend 4K HQ for super static shots, meaning you're doing an interview. I could shoot these in 4K HQ and I would have no issues. But if you're shooting something moving, then it may become an issue. So 4K HQ for super static situation, 4K normal for more dynamic situation. Not only that, 4K HQ stops at 30 FPS. The 4K 60 goes, the 4K normal goes also to 60 frames per second, at the expense of a crop. Now, depending on the mode that you're shooting, there's a lot of different crops, so I'm not going to list all of them because it's kind of confusing. That's something that tells you the camera isn't mainly dedicated to videographers, but mostly to photographers. But if you're okay with that, you can squeeze pretty good image quality out of the video of this camera. Again, if you are mainly a videographer that sometimes shoot photos, your best option in Fujifilm, aside from the X-H2S, which is the best of both worlds, is the XS20. It's still small, compact, and it's more video-oriented than the X-T50. On the other hand, if you are a photography-oriented guy that sometimes shoot videos, you can have a lot of fun with the X-T50. Of course, the fact that the screen doesn't flip toward you doesn't allow for easy vlogging. You can still vlog because if you have a super wide angle lens, you can still vlog and be sure that the camera is still going to have you in the frame and is not going to lose you because the autofocus is working really good when it comes to tracking. Also, they added with the latest firmwares, and this one comes with those, the touch to track function, which is very, very handy when it comes to video. Again, in this situation, I found again that the pre-production camera wouldn't focus on in specific occasions. The production camera is not giving me those issues at all. So again, it's a pre-production issue, I guess. But in general, with video, despite not being dedicated to video, you can get great results. One thing that I forgot to mention is that with the stabilization, you can finally use an X-T50 for video in movement. However, of course, it's not gimbal-like. So if you want gimbal-like motion, you need a gimbal. You still need a gimbal. But for normal conditions, static conditions, I was shooting static subject. You're seeing them right now. You can get a lot of good shots without the need for either a monopod or a gimbal or anything like that. And the shots that you see, the footage that you're seeing is not stabilized in post, so is what you get out of the camera without digital image stabilization. It was only the OIS. That's really handy if you're shooting video occasionally, because it helps getting you better results, more pleasing results on your day-to-day use. As you've seen in this video, I'm pretty high on this camera, and I purchased it for myself, so that tells you a lot. However, we haven't discussed about the price. This camera gets sold at $1,399 in the States and 1,500 euros in Italy. That means it's not your typical X-T50 camera anymore. We all know that the previous version were sold at 900, less than 1,000. The threshold was to stay less than $1,000. That means this is one of the biggest jump in price of a model over its predecessor in the entire Fujifilm history, and it's hard to swallow for the vast majority of people. And I understand it, because we think about the X-T50 camera as the entry-level series, and you don't want an entry-level camera that costs this much. However, what I think is that Fujifilm is not considering this the entry-level camera anymore. That's why they're keeping the X-T30 Mark II in production as their entry-level camera, but they're basically considering this camera as a mini X-T5 that you choose over the X-T5, not because you want to save money, but because you want a smaller, more travel-friendly package, which goes along with smaller lenses, because you're going to probably purchase small lenses for this camera. So, although I'm not justifying the price because it's high, but everything has become much more expensive lately. It's a trend that it's hard to stop for now. At the same time, I understand why it's being priced this way. And again, you're getting a 40 megapixel camera with arguably the best image quality in any APC sensor available in the market right now. I only hold my judgment with Canon because I haven't tried that 32 megapixel sensor just yet. But realistically, this is probably the best image quality that you get, and you get it on a super small and compact package at $1,500. 5,500 euros, $1,400. Again, I'm not trying to justify it, but I'm understanding why it's being priced this way. And the one thing that made the difference for me, the one thing that made me high on this camera, is that this camera reminded me the reasons why I went from DSLR to mirrorless in the first place, and especially to Fuji. This is quintessentially Fuji. This camera is quintessentially Fuji. It gets you all the good things that we've always considered about Fuji: image quality, good build quality, portability, ease of use, a lot of stuff that made Fujifilm famous. And a lot of people were criticizing Fuji when they started bringing up the X-H2, X-H2S, these bigger cameras, because they were saying Fujifilm has lost its way. Well, the X-T50 brings Fujifilm back on their original path, which was compact, portable, lightweight, easy to use, high performance. And that's what you get. That's really what you get with this camera. So again, it's priced high, and it's priced very close to the X-T5, which is the biggest criticism that you get out of this camera. And yes, if you consider the street price of the X-T5 a year and a half after it's being launched to the MSRP price that you get on the X-T50 today, the price is very, 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 very close, and it's hard to easily go towards the X-T50 because you're leaving behind the dual card, you're leaving behind a bigger buffer, you're leaving behind the battery, a bigger viewfinder, and all that. But if you think about the long term, it's easy to expect that this camera is going to be around $400 or $500 less than the X-T5 once this is all said and done, meaning that it would restore the $500 difference in the launch price between these two cameras. So yes, it's expensive, but at the same time, it's a much better version of the X2 digit camera compared to any of the predecessors. They were always cutting short on something, especially video capabilities. They were cutting short on a lot of stuff. With this one, you don't. You just have a mini X-T5 and you're saving a few bucks and a few grams to go along with a smaller body that is easier to carry around. To me, I would highly recommend to purchase this camera. Again, I purchased it for me, and if you're looking for a travel-friendly camera, to me, it doesn't get better than this. Let's just put it this way. That's it for today. This video was way longer than I expected. I'll see you in the next one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, think about doing that, or leave me comments in the comment section below. Leave me a thumbs up. Do your social stuff that you know you should be doing. I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.